Even in a world riddled with violence, love can bloom, and we are destined to find our soulmates. Join us for this bulletproof romance. Welcome to the world of Koroshi AI. In a parking lot, a shootout has just ended and only 2 people are left standing. A stunning young blonde-haired bounty hunter aiming at a confident, unarmed gunman who's just run out of bullets. The gunman charges at her confidently, but as she fires, narrowly missing him, he closes in and after a short scuffle, pins her down. The young assassin looms over the woman, yet instead of killing her, he asks for her name, pleased to meet a woman in their line of work, and flirtatiously clarifies his intentions. The next day, the same young woman, Chateau Dankworth, roams the streets hunting her next bounty. Yet, she's persistently harassed by the gunman who seems hell-bent on dating her, calling her day and night, much to her annoyance. She is closely monitored by her employers, who caution her to avoid taking too many risks. At a business meeting, Chateau's company is presented with a lucrative offer targeting a high-profile individual. Upon viewing the photo, Chateau discovers her suitor and new target is Sun Ryang-ha, a legendary assassin known for wiping out an entire mafia family in one night and carrying numerous bounties on his head. The contract is tempting but deemed too dangerous by Chateau's organization, prompting her boss to advise her against pursuing him. After her boss leaves, Sun approaches Chateau and invites her for a drink. At the park, the bounty hunter and the assassin chat. Sun proposes to mentor her, revealing her current target in return. Overstepping, Sun angers Chateau who attacks him, only to be effortlessly subdued by the skilled assassin. She inquires about the cost of his mentorship, to which he replies he just wants to see her again at Christmas. On Christmas morning, after spending the night with a woman, Sun kills a man who was waiting behind the door, deducing the woman was his accomplice. That afternoon, our 2 heroes meet again, with Sun attempting to make their rendezvous as romantic as possible, though Chateau responds coolly. In a hotel suite, Sun presents Chateau with her Christmas gift. The man he had killed earlier was her intended target. He provides the location of the body. Despite her suspicions, Chateau is intrigued enough to continue the assassin's game, accepting the gift, and the date continues. The date ends with both young people heading to their separate homes, but not before Euripides, Chateau's boss, spots the couple on the street. Sun embraces Chateau and confirms there's something special about her. She doesn't reek of decay, unlike the rest of the world. 17 years ago, near a country villa, a car is stopped by the police, who find a man's corpse and a young blonde-haired girl inside. The police ask the girl for her name, but she doesn't know what to respond. Chateau heads home but can't shake thoughts of Sun from her mind. Meanwhile, a pleased Sun also returns to his place, unaware that a mysterious figure is watching him. The next day at the office, Chateau's boss questions whether the young man he saw with his employee could really be the assassin's son, as it would be too high profile for someone of Sun's secretive nature, and it's unlikely Chateau would date him. Despite his doubts, the boss concludes he must be mistaken and inquires about Chateau, only to find that she's out on a job. Following Sun's directions, Chateau arrives at a warehouse where she recovers the body of her target, a pimp, as well as rescuing his still-living wife. Unbeknownst to her, Sun is simultaneously carrying out one of his own assignments. Sun storms into the building of the man who offered the bounty on himself, killing the guards and confronting the boss. Chateau's boss calls her, revealing that their contractor, the eldest son of a triad boss, has just been murdered. While driving back to the office with the surviving woman, Chateau is ambushed by a mysterious motorcyclist with a spiderweb tattoo on his face. Although she evades him initially, she loses control of the vehicle and crashes down a ravine. Sun, feeling that something is wrong as Chateau isn't dismissing his calls as usual, heads to the presumed route she would have taken. He arrives at the crash site to find the wrecked vehicles and starts searching for Chateau. The phone keeps ringing, and the tattooed man answers, speaks with Sun, and it seems they share a past. But the call is a trap. Sun fires into the air, and the sound heard over the phone helps him pinpoint Chateau's location and her assailant. The tattooed man decides not to confront Sun directly and retreats, but not before telling Chateau to deliver a message. It's time for you to pay for what you did, traitor. He vanishes, and Chateau faints, only to be found by Sun in the woods. Chateau awakens in a motel room with Sun, who informs her that the woman she was transporting didn't survive the crash. Chateau questions the assassin about the identity of her attacker, but Sun claims not to recognize him, although his memories suggest otherwise. That night, running a fever, Chateau dreams of a moment from her childhood when she encountered a mysterious man who rested his face against hers. The night passes, and the next day, Chateau recovers from his injuries. On Sun's recommendation, he takes a shower and is mortified to find out that the killer sent his clothes to be washed. Sun returns with the freshly cleaned clothes of the young woman, who feels embarrassed by the familiarity of the killer. In a phone booth, Chateau calls his work colleagues to come pick him up and says goodbye to Sun, repeating the tattooed man's message before leaving. The young woman asks the killer if he has any idea who the man is or what the message means, but he just smiles and claims ignorance. As Chateau walks away, Sun's smile fades as she begins to remember. 5 years earlier, Sun and the tattooed man, named Ho, work for the same organization led by Sung-woo. Ho angrily complains to the leader of their criminal empire that Sun is being promoted first despite him having worked there longer. Additionally, Ho doesn't trust the young man, but Sun's charm and competence earn him a place among the organization's top ranks, eventually becoming the leader's personal bodyguard. That night, while Sung-woo congratulates Sun in his penthouse, the young man pulls out a gun from a briefcase and cold-bloodedly murders him. Back in the present, Chateau returns to the office where Euripides is annoyed by his absence and the destruction of his car. He also asks if the young woman is really in contact with Sun, to which she doesn't respond. Later, Chateau finds Sun at her house, where the charismatic killer awaits her with sweet pastries. Chateau doesn't want to invite the young man into her apartment, but knowing that if she doesn't, he'll be left outside in plain view of the neighbors, she reluctantly invites him in. Inside the young woman's home, Sun shows interest in a photo of Chateau with her parents, but she doesn't want to engage in conversation about her private life. Chateau reveals that Euripides knows about him, but Sun isn't worried. If Chateau were to reveal him and the company benefits from Sun capturing bounties for them, his reputation would be ruined. So, the only options are to kill him or work with him in secret. Ultimately, the decision rests with Chateau, who must choose between her job or him. Chateau can't understand why Sun is risking his life, but he points out that she's doing the same by associating with him. By not properly rejecting him, she became part of his life, with all the dangers that entails. As the two converse, Chateau's mother calls to remind her of the anniversary of her father's death. This message seems to sadden the young woman, so Sun decides to leave. Chateau visits her father's grave while her mother meets with a young man named Brian, a childhood friend of Chateau's, and decides to tell him the truth. In the cemetery parish, a nun delivers a message to our heroine, and Chateau encounters the persistent Sun again. While the young woman tells him she doesn't want to spend time with him, that's when 3 masked men attack the church. Thanks to his experience, Sun outmaneuvers the attackers and kills 2, leaving the 3rd alive for interrogation. Chateau notices that the nun is missing, but her belongings are on the ground, so she rushes to rescue her. The 3rd gunman reveals that the real target is not him, but the young woman. When Sun learns this, he realizes that Chateau has fled. In the midst of the cemetery, Chateau encounters Ho again, and the two face off. The tattooed man is a formidable enemy, barely feeling pain, so he defeats the young woman. Sun calls Chateau's phone, but it's Ho who answers. Ho mocks Sun, telling him that the assassins he sent were mere amateurs. Frustrated, Sun asks his former colleague what he wants. At home, Chateau's mother reveals to Brian how she and her husband adopted Chateau 17 years ago. Her husband had been the police officer in charge when Chateau was discovered with the corpse whose passport identified him as Sun Ryang-ha. When asked for the girl's name, she said Chateau Noble, and the officer took her home, where he and his wife fed and sheltered her while the case progressed. But the case seemed to hit a dead end when connections to organized crime emerged, the fact that the true identity of the man accompanying the girl was never known, and even that the name Chateau Noble didn't appear in any records, making the investigation difficult. When the case went cold, the girl was sent to an orphanage, but the retiring detective decided to adopt her, and the girl became Chateau Dankworth. Back in the present, in an abandoned factory, Chateau wakes up tied inside a vehicle loaded with explosives. Meanwhile, Sun encounters and shoots Ho, but the car with Chateau inside explodes. Despite being shot, Ho pulls out a knife and insists they continue their fight. Chateau manages to escape from the vehicle before it explodes but is injured in the process when shrapnel wounds one of her legs. Sun and Ho continue their fight, with Ho attacking our hero with a knife. However, the fight doesn't last long as Sun shoots his opponent again, causing him to die. Ho remembers how a member of the triad, Sungwoo, took him in when he was a drug addict and became his mentor, which is why the young assassin hates Sun so much for killing Sungwoo and the rest of the triad leaders. Sun rescues the injured Chateau from the burning building, and they both escape. However, the young man faints as in his final attack, Ho managed to stab our hero. In the distance, as the building burns, another unknown assassin reports Ho's defeat to his boss and asks what to do next. With the help of Jim, Euripides' secretary, Chateau takes Sun to an underground doctor, but Jim also informs our heroine that while he's on her side, it's his duty to report everything to Euripides. Chateau understands and thanks her friend for the help. In Sun's room, Chateau suggests that Sun should flee while she sleeps and disappear quietly before Euripides arrives. Sun offers to take her with him to a life free of responsibility, but she refuses, so he leaves after mocking her for her sense of responsibility. 3 weeks later, Sun calls Chateau, who has been suspended from her job by Euripides due to her actions. Sun contacts Chateau to inform her that he's going on a trip for a while but will return. Chateau begins to experience flashes of memory from her childhood when she met the man who was driving the vehicle where she was found. The next day, after her suspension is over, Chateau, Euripides, and Jim go incognito on the cruise ship Artemisia to protect one of Euripides' relatives, a VIP with significant influence in global politics and finance. Sun also boards the ship, unaware that the unknown assassin who was spying on them in the factory, revealed to be a rather friendly young man, is also among them. In an orphanage in the past, a nameless boy is adopted by a mysterious man who names the child's son Ryangha. On the cruise ship, Chateau and Jim learn that the VIP is actually Hawk, Euripides' wife, who owns a multi-billion-dollar corporation and is politically connected through her powerful family. Euripides cannot be part of the protection team as he is obligated by his wife to engage in social relations. Sun appears before Chateau, who suspects he is there to assassinate Hawk. Sun neither confirms nor denies this, explaining to the young woman that if that's her suspicion, she should probably watch him 24/7. He promises that as long as she keeps an eye on him, he won't make any suspicious moves. With Euripides' permission, Chateau agrees to share a room with Sun throughout the trip, with Euripides and Jim monitoring via cameras. Euripides watches the couple's room, where Sun is in bed and Chateau is on the couch, keeping an eye on the assassin. Sun notices that Chateau is struggling to sleep and, after some teasing, he takes her to bed where she quickly falls asleep, leading Sun to believe that the young woman must trust him. The next day, while having breakfast, Sun points out that Chateau's work clothes make her stand out in the crowd, as it's obvious she works in security when she should be undercover. He convinces her that at the next stop of the cruise, he'll take her shopping, despite her obvious discomfort. While our heroes shop for clothes for the young woman and alerted by the presence of the assassin, Jim organizes additional reinforcements to keep Hawk safe. Euripides speaks privately with Sun over the phone, revealing that he knows Chateau doesn't remember much of her past, except that her original surname might be Noble. This information seems to disturb the young man, who agrees to meet with the girl's boss privately that same night. Jim's reinforcements, Jose and Cedran, arrive. That night, Euripides waits alone for Sun, intending to unravel the mystery of our two protagonists' identities. Meanwhile, Chateau discovers that Sun has disappeared, causing everyone to worry. They're all on red alert, not knowing that both the boss and the assassin had agreed to a meeting and fearing the worst. In the darkness and while waiting for Sun, Euripides is stabbed in the throat by an unknown attacker. It's revealed that Euripides' attacker isn't actually Sun, but a skilled young man with blonde hair who's adept with knives. As Chateau desperately searches for her boss, she's contacted via earpiece by Sun, who has just found Euripides with a knife lodged in his neck. He's still alive, so Sun instructs Chateau to seek urgent medical help. Sun pursues the assassin, who escapes after throwing a knife at him and incapacitating his gun. Before fleeing, the assassin warns Sun that he wants both him and Chateau to remain on the ship. Meanwhile, Chateau finds Euripides, who tells her that his attacker wasn't Sun. She believes him and urges him to conserve his strength. Medical reinforcements arrive in time, and our protagonist's boss is airlifted to a hospital, leaving Chateau on the cruise ship in search of her attacker. Chateau confronts the assassin, who introduces himself as Jinan 1, but instead of attacking her, Jinan asks to speak with her. In his cabin, Sun fixes his weapon, which was broken by Jinan's knife, when Chateau enters and points her gun at him, revealing that Jinan has threatened the life of the young woman's mother. The only way for Chateau to save her is to hand Sun over. With no other options and worried about her mother's safety, the young woman agrees. Surprisingly, Sun understands the situation and agrees to be handed over to Jinan. Overwhelmed by guilt for agreeing to the exchange and fear for her mother's safety, Chateau attempts to take her own life, believing that by doing so, Jinan would no longer have a reason to harm her mother. She also considers her existence a risk to her loved ones and believes the only way to protect them is by taking her own life. Angry not at her decision to hand him over but at her decision to take her own life, Sun stops her, throws her to the ground, and begins to choke her while insisting that she be more honest with herself and others. Jose and Cedrin suspect that the trip hasn't been cancelled after Euripides' departure. This decision is revealed to be part of the plan of Jinan's boss, a mysterious man who speaks to a girl and needs the cruise to continue its course so he can gain access to Sun. In Sun's cabin, the young assassin leaves Chateau unconscious. In the past, a young Sun is depicted as a diligent teenager studying hard so that one day he can work for Donnie, the man who rescued him and gave him his name. One afternoon, the young Sun meets with Donnie, who entrusts him with a mission that only the young man can carry out. Chateau dreams that she's in the car with the dead man who introduces himself as Sun Riangha, a friend, and she introduces herself as Chateau Noble. On the ship, Jinan effortlessly kills Jose and Cedran and throws their bodies overboard. Euripides finally wakes up, so Jim decides to meet the ship at the next port, but while traveling to the port, another assassin on a motorcycle shoots through the car's glass. At the port, Sun leaves the ship and meets Jinan, explaining that he has left Chateau on board since she shouldn't be involved anymore and has fulfilled her part of the deal. Jinan accepts the condition and escorts Sun to an unknown location where another assassin named Nika awaits. After Jinan searches Sun for hidden weapons, the two transport our hero to meet their employer, referred to as Donald Bachman, also known as Donnie. Sun denies knowing Donnie and is unfazed by Nika's attempts to interrogate him, even allowing himself to be hit without any expression, which irritates his captor, who notices that Sun is in control and even anticipates his moves when Sun receives a butt stroke to the face. Chateau is located on board the ship by Jim, who survived with minor injuries thanks to the bulletproof windows in his car. They both try to leave the ship but are stopped by the same assassin who shot Jim. Working together, they manage to shoot and knock out the assassin. Donnie calls the assassin's phone, but Chateau doesn't answer. Upon arriving at Donnie's mansion, Sun is led in with handcuffs and blindfolded to meet the mysterious villain. In Donnie's mansion, the man explains to Sun that his assassins are anonymous orphans he raised as soldiers and killers. He also reveals that Riangha Sun was the name he gave to one of his orphans. The other orphans believe that Sun is actually one of their brothers, but Donnie clarifies that the real Sun died, meaning that the Sun we know is not the original Riangha Sun but an imposter. Outside the cruise ship, Chateau and Jim smuggle off the ship with the wounded and bound assassin. Donnie continues to explain that for some reason, Sun had access not only to the name of the original Sun but also to all the false information that came with that name. On the other hand, Sun is disappointed to meet Donnie as he expected someone more significant, which infuriates Jinan, who tries to stab him, only to be stopped by his brothers who scold him for being so impulsive. Even the psychotic Nika is stabbed in the hand while stopping the young man's rage. Chateau interrogates the assassin, who reveals that the whole situation has been orchestrated by Donnie, known in the underworld as the Trigger, who is paid by clients worldwide to use his assassins to start wars around the globe. Chateau asks Jim to protect her parents and then resigns so that her actions no longer tarnish Euripides' reputation. The young man ignores the request, saying he won't allow her to resign. While Donnie scolds Jinan in his room, Nika proves to be more than he seems as he is aware that when he got into the car, Jinan didn't search him properly and knows that the assassin has a lockpick that will allow him to free himself. Nika allows this action so that the two can fight. Nika is about to win the fight, but he is interrupted by Donnie's guards, and taking advantage of the situation, Sun kills the guards and obtains a weapon. Having obtained Sun's whereabouts, Chateau crashes the gate of Donnie's mansion with a truck. Sun weakens from blood loss and passes out. Sun remembers that when he was a child, he was also in the car with little Chateau and the real Riangha. Sun loses the will to fight, and Nika beats him to the brink of death. However, this bores the psychopath, who walks away, but not before revealing that Chateau is outside the compound. While the guards watch Chateau, one by one, they are killed by Sun, who miraculously seems to have regained his strength, motivated by the need to save the young woman. In the mansion's hallways, Jinan confronts Nika for letting Sun go. Chateau is surrounded by enemy forces and is about to die when she is rescued again by Sun, who jokingly scolds her for trying to rescue him. Chateau and Sun hide under a bridge in a homeless camp to tend to Sun's wounds. To atone for accidentally helping Sun escape, Nika promises to find him and kill him. Chateau and Sun awkwardly thank each other for saving each other. Back at the mansion, Donnie decides not to send Nika after Sun, but still demands that they find Chateau, whom he has been searching for since she was a child. He even reveals that he knows her true name, Chateau Noble. The night in the homeless camp passes without incident, except for the appearance of a vagabond who invites the young people to dinner. Sun invents that he and Chateau are husband and wife, so they don't raise suspicion. The next day, fully recovered from their injuries, the two young people decide to continue on their way. Sun is forced to pickpocket for money, revealing that due to an unpleasant childhood, he was forced to learn criminal skills before learning to read or write, which makes Chateau feel guilty as she believes that our hero would move more comfortably without having to drag her along with him. He responds with a joke. Chateau wonders about Donnie's organization and why they are interested in her, but Sun refuses to answer. Angry, Chateau tries to leave to discover herself. Sun loses his temper and threatens to break her wrists to keep her obedient, but then relents and explains that he is not willing to lose her after spending so many years trying to find her again after losing her the first time. These words trigger Chateau's memories, and she suddenly remembers that when she was a child, she shot someone. In the past, it is revealed what favor Donnie had asked the original Riangha to do, to take care of a man named Liz Noble. On their way to meet Liz, the original Sun encountered and then saved a young man from a couple of child traffickers. The nameless young man wakes up, recovered from his wounds, in a university dorm room where he is greeted by the original Riangha Sun, who decided to take him to his room to treat his injuries while waiting for a call from Liz, the man he was supposed to contact by orders of Donnie. At first, the nameless young man distrusts Sun and even fears his contact, but he soon becomes accustomed to him and his kindness, explaining that when he met him, other adults had hurt him with the intention of selling him to a child trafficking organization, and Sun is the first person who treated him with decency. Sun also thanks the young man for saving him that day. When the young man is about to leave, the original Sun receives a call from Liz begging him to find something that Liz was hiding. Liz was shot while still on the phone by Sung Woo, the same mafia boss that Sun would assassinate years later, who was furious because the girl he was looking for was not there. The young man helps Riangha, and together they find a sleeping girl hidden in a suitcase, owned by her father. The two young men steal a car and escape, still unsure of what to do with her. On the way, the girl wakes up, crying, and identifies herself as Chateau Noble. Realizing she was Liz's daughter, Sun decides to take responsibility for her. The young men break into a cabin at night, but the young man, noticing that things are getting out of hand and could cost them dearly, decides to leave. Sun hesitates whether to kill the young man to keep his whereabouts secret, but lets him go. On the way, the young man encounters the surviving child traffickers who want revenge and chase him through the forest. The original Sun feels guilty for letting the young man go, so he decides to go after him, leaving the gun in the cabin. The girl wakes up scared and hides, clutching the forgotten gun left by the young man. Unable to find the young man, Sun returns to the cabin where a frightened Chateau accidentally shoots him. In the present, an adult Chateau remembers these events and collapses into Sun's arms. In the past, the original Sun gets up, injured, and takes the girl in the car to keep her safe. Meanwhile, in the forest, the trafficker severely beats the unnamed young man, but the young man manages to kill him. The injured young man returns to the cabin in search of first aid supplies, only to find it empty and with traces of blood, so he figures out the worst. Feeling guilty for not revealing his true name to Sun, as he had been in so many places and changed names so many times that he no longer remembered his original name, the young man faints. The young man wakes up in the hospital a week later, where a police detective interrogates him and informs Sun that Ryangha died after putting Chateau to safety. The cop tells the young man that he's not in trouble but to forget the incident ever happened and that he never heard of Ryangha's son. Devastated, Sun took Ryangha's name as his own, deciding he wouldn't act like the incident never happened. In the present, Sun takes Chateau to another safe house, where she's so exhausted from remembering everything that she sleeps for 2 days straight. When she wakes up, she's furious because Sun knew everything all along and didn't tell her. But she finally understands why she never properly rejected Sun. Deep down, she recognized Ryangha's name and couldn't reject the man she accidentally killed. Relieved, Sun is glad that someone finally acknowledges his friend's actions. Meanwhile, a car parks in front of Chateau's mother's house. Donnie meets with the head of the noble family. Nika takes Jim hostage, while Euripides manages to keep Chateau's mother safe. Chateau tries to hire Sun to kill Donnie, but he tells her they'll have to work together as equals, which she happily accepts. But she's puzzled when he refuses the money and tells her to figure out what she really wants as payment. In the end, on the rooftop of the building, the two young ones prepare to carry out their missions together.